thanks for sticking around and being here this evening. And your reward for being here is free beer. That was fun saying that. As I've been working with Kyle here, let me get my cursor over here. Get this going. All right.
Be careful on the steps.
So as I have been working with the VMUG leadership, Kyle and I have been having a lot of conversations in regards to assessing the landscape of the IT industry, as well as how businesses are evolving today, as well as how IT professionals in general, their career paths are also need to evolve towards the IT industry's direction as well. And through some of these conversations, I've been able to share with him how my career has evolved over the last 15 years and the journey that I've gone through in my career and how I have aligned my career path to the IT industry's evolution. And we thought that it would be pretty cool to carry on the theme that you guys have been having in regards to the previous keynotes, with this morning around building your own brand, and this afternoon around the Brian Huddleston and the Tech Council being here, talking about creating a broader and richer community in regards to the tech community, but also how the business landscape is shaping up in Nashville as well. And as you can see, one of the t-shirts that I saw recently on Facebook was pretty cool. It showed the Nashville skyline with the Batman building, but it showed a bunch of cranes in the middle of the skyline. And I think that that's a pretty good representation of how the economy, the business community, and everything else is booming here in Nashville. So we should feel very, very privileged to be a local resident here and be able to contribute to it. So with that being said, it has been a journey in regards to how the IT industry has evolved over the last 15 years. And I want to share with you that journey, as well as sharing it with you through my lens and how I've been able to adopt my career towards that evolution. So for me, it all began in 1997. I just graduated high school and I was going to join the Marine Corps. And so, happy birthday. Today is the Marine Corps' birthday. So I went to boot camp in 1997, and when I was in the recruiter's office, apparently I scored high enough on the ASVAB where I could choose any MOS that I wanted to do. So I was like, look, man, just give me something that I can do so when I get out, I can continue to do it. And so back then it was during the .com era. And it was a very interesting time then. NT Windows Domain Server just came out. And he was like, so what do you know about computers? And I was like, not a damn thing. I took a keyboarding class in high school, so I know how to type. So he's like, don't worry, we'll teach you. So he did. And it was very interesting times too, because the economy was flourishing. Obviously, we had some drama going on in the White House with our commander-in-chief. And some immoral act that was apparently performed in the Oval Office. But it was interesting times as well because as I was getting trained and as I was attached to a supply logistics company, I had to maintain the supply inventory and publish the supply inventory warehouse inventories to our kernel. And the way that it was done was over a night shift crew in which I had to extract the data and do manual publishes of that data to a website. So basically I was a webmaster. But I took a 7 to 9 hour manual job and I found ways to automate that. And I got that job down to where it could be performed in under 3 hours. And by exploring different things, back then I learned how to import the data in an Access database and publish it through the front page, right? Very simple, but at the time it was revolutionary. Now, because of that, I became obsessed with automation. And I also had some interesting opportunities too to go set up computer networks in the jungles of Thailand and connect them to a satellite for broadband connection, as well as the mountains of Korea. But I also gained a lot of experience too, and I pursued some of these certifications and focused my career on infrastructure during that time. Now, in 2001, I got out of the Marine Corps at the Marine. So from there, I moved on to the civilian sector because, for one reason, they outsourced my job to Kyle's company, CSC, Computer Sciences Corporation. So I wanted to take the experience that I had, the GI Bill money that I had, and get out. So during that time, along came VMware. And I was fortunate enough to work for this company that was doing internal software development. They had this VMware environment that they used for their developers to play in, right? So during that time, they were an agile software development shop, and I attended some of their Scrum meetings, and I didn't realize that we were doing DevOps during this time in the mid-2000s before the phrase DevOps was coined. But we were doing a lot of those practices in which DevOps had. But there was also a lot of firefighting, finger pointing, things going on there with my director of IT. Actually, there was no DevOps books back then. He actually read The Art of War. And so it was ways in which we determined we want to, from an IT operations and infrastructure standpoint, we had weekly 2-hour meetings in which we would just go into a boardroom where there was a whiteboard and we would just say, let's brainstorm, right? We want to be able to find efficiencies, find ways in which the business, when they look at us to deliver on what they're requesting, we want to be yes men to the business. We don't want to have to say no. And then so we were able to brainstorm and find creative ways to automate, find efficiencies to make that experience better. And I ended up virtualizing our data center, right? Because it got to the point where we couldn't even plug in another server. And this is right before vMotion came out. So I actually found ways to do VMware consolidated backups and stuff, scripting everything. Anyways, to deliver quicker on VMware. But I also was fortunate enough in 2005 where they sent me to VMware training. I got my very first VCP, and I was one of the first ones in the world. I remember it was 1825. And I saw that this virtualization thing is really going to take off. And so I banked everything that I had on that. And believe it or not, back then, there was actually VMUG was established. And I was going to VMUG. We actually hosted one in our corporate office over in Maryland Farms. So I've been a part of the VMUG community for a long time. Now, with virtualization, what is now paved the path for is to the software-defined data center, in which we understand it's giving you the ability to abstract the intelligence of these infrastructure components and pass that management and configuration control to a software-defined control plane, in which you can now script and automate manual provisioning tasks. And I'm sure, as we're all IT professionals, you're familiar when you go to provision out infrastructure, you got your checklists and build sheets that you got to go through. You need to be able to identify ways to automate those routine, mundane tasks, because we're looking at that as systems integration work. That's being in the plumbing business from an IT standpoint. You want to be able to find ways to identify those efficiencies and eliminate that waste of work, because that's time that doesn't need to be spent in which you can be more proactive in interfacing with the business more. Now what that provides you is the ability to virtualize all this infrastructure, in which now you can then hand that over back to the business or the different customers that you support, either internal customers or even just IT operations or software development teams or whatever it is, and be able to offer that in a self-service catalog manner, so that they can do that provisioning themselves. But it's important for you to understand how it's architected on the back end, how these workflows need to be built so that you got successful provisioning that's going on, and then you can advertise that self-service catalog back to the business. So as you can see, when you abstract the intelligence of this software, or of the hardware, and pass it up to a software-defined control plane, you're able to pool those resources and automate against it. This is an ideal infrastructure to support moving into a cloud environment. And what we're trying to obtain here is the ability for IT organizations within their company to be able to become a service provider back to their business. Because if you aren't able to deliver rapidly on the business request, then IT will lose control altogether. And these business units will circumvent IT. And then all of a sudden you may have a shadow IT problem. And then you lose control. But yet it's your responsibility as an IT professional to understand what the business is trying to achieve and translate that to a technology solution. And so there's a lot of companies that are pursuing not only private cloud strategies, but also they're no stranger to subscribing to software as a service applications or public cloud environments, and then being able to have a hook to create a true hybrid cloud, in which you can extend your data centers from your capitally owned assets to an OpEx subscription model to a public cloud environment, such as Behr is a great example of that. So, where I work at today is, obviously, I work for EMC and I'm a V specialist, but I work for a unique federation of companies. And I have visibility into all of these companies' product portfolios. Obviously, EMC, II stands for Information Infrastructure to support the information intelligence. How do you secure your data, protect your data, replicate your data, ensure that it's always highly available. And it's a foundation to a lot of these private cloud environments. But VMware is doing a lot of interesting things too, as you know, because we're all here, around the software-defined data center, hybrid cloud strategies, end-user computing strategies, mobility, being able to access your applications from anywhere, anytime, on any device. And then Pivotal is another company within our federation that pursues their own strategy, but Pivotal Labs is one of the pioneers of agile software development and peer programming and DevOps, which we'll get into here in more of a second, but they also provide Pivotal Cloud Foundry, which is platform as a service, and I'll be able to get into that too and shed some light on what that does. VCE, also the V-Block. We also have hyper-converged, converged infrastructures that support everything that we're trying to achieve from an end-to-end solution standpoint. VirtuStream is another interesting acquisition that we made recently in regards to providing a management layer over these hybrid cloud environments and running your virtual machines like a utility model. Anyways, I don't mean to bore you with all of this, but what I do want to say is we have EMC IT proven track records in which we drink our own champagne, eat our own dog food, whichever way you want to look at it. But we've built our own private clouds from an internal IT standpoint and advertise that back out to the business, in which our IT is paid for by the end users that we support. So also we have a DevOps practice. VMware has a DevOps practice. They're a DevOps organization. But along the way, in my career, I've also, like I said, worked for some DevOps companies as well. So I'm very familiar with what it's trying to achieve. And ultimately, what DevOps is trying to achieve is trying to identify a competitive advantage that you can get in the business landscape. And as you know, we are in a highly disruptive era today. And it's no longer the case, like Pat Gelsinger, the CEO of VMware, has said, it's no longer the case of the big conquering the small. It's more about the fast beating the slow. So it forces your hand to become innovative in everything that you're trying to achieve so that you can maintain your market share, and some startup, which is also good to have startups too, may not have the potential to, take that market share from those customers or from those businesses. But we're now in an era of the Internet of Things. So like I said before, I started out my career in the .com era. Now it's no longer an Internet of Sites, it's an Internet of Things. For example, I just bought a new stereo receiver this weekend, and it has all these streaming media inputs. I can control the receiver with an app, and I can play my Slacker radio, Pandora, and all that through it. But what it is this new era also provides this cloud that everybody talks about, right? I download these apps on my phone from the cloud. But if you look at what it really is doing, is it's providing a level of convenience for which people interface with the customers that they subscribe to in a very convenient manner now. And just think about it in your daily lives. How many apps do you use? Like, for example, I'm always in my banking app for whatever reason. As a matter of fact, just this last weekend, I went to a new oil change company called Express Oil Change. I was normally a Jiffy Lube customer. But they have an app, and then it reminds me of my oil change services and all that. So now it forced me to move over to this company when I've been loyal to Jiffy Lube this whole time. So in every industry, I travel a lot for work. I use all these travel apps for my boarding passes. In every industry vertical, they're creating an app for that. And so if you look at this software is eating the world comment, Mark Andreessen from a venture capitalist firm out in Silicon Valley called Andreessen Horowitz wrote this essay that was published by the New York Times in which in 2011 he said software is eating the world. And it is proving itself to be true because what we're saying here is no matter what industry you're in, these businesses need to transform themselves into becoming a software company first, because otherwise their customer base and their market share will be taken away by some innovative startup or some other company that is creating these little innovation pockets within their enterprise that will disrupt and take that market share. And so now if you think of this, what is really happening now is these customers, who we all are customers of the businesses that we interface with, we're no longer becoming humans going into a retail store shelf to pick a product off the shelf. We are becoming digital users that are getting this level of convenience through an app on our smart device or on our phone. And so these customers are now becoming digital users. So it's forcing the hand and putting pressure on these companies to now transform themselves into becoming a digital business in order to provide that, continue to provide that level of convenience to their customers. So it's an interesting transition in which the face of the users is now turning into a digital user, and the businesses now have to transform themselves into a digital business. Now what that is giving way to is what we're now calling these cloud-native applications. They're these next-generation applications that live and reside in the cloud and have massive web-scale capabilities through these distributed cloud networks and frameworks. And these applications, as these businesses grow and they scale, the technology will not get in the way of that massive scale anymore if they are a cloud-native web scale application, because now the application can scale along with the business scale. So it's very interesting times now if you look at this evolution. And by the way, VMware is doing a lot of stuff in regards to cloud-native apps. I think there was a session today on Photon and running containers and microservices on your hypervisors with a light VMware wrapper around these containers where the container engine is running in the hypervisor. Now you can manage your VMs just like you can containers and still maintain the control, the resource allocation, the network provisioning, and all the other things that you get with managing VMs you can now get with containers. But VMware has also created the Photon platform, which are hosts that are built by working with our partners over at Pivotal Cloud Foundry, so that these hosts will maintain and manage and govern these massive applications that are built through microservices architecture, so that they can support the cloud-native applications. So now if you look at the traditional IT model, when you're doing systems integration work, how much time is spent up this entire stack, right? When you go to provision out this infrastructure, you're spending a lot of time building and configuring the physical servers, connecting it to some virtualization platform, then installing the OS, and then there's a handoff of that VM over to the network team, the security team to get antivirus installed on it, and so on. And then you got to hand it over to the applications team to put their middleware environment in a runtime environment. And then the code needs to be able to run on that. But if you think about it, the developers, all they care about is their code, and IT operations needs to worry about how is this going to be monitored, how is this going to be secured, how is this going to be replicated, how is this going to be protected. So the coders have an important responsibility in understanding what the business is trying to achieve, versus IT operations has an important responsibility in maintaining that infrastructure to support that application workload. And so infrastructure as a service is a way in which all that systems integration work can be automated. And there's a lot of IT manufacturing companies that are out there on the floor today that are creating these converged infrastructure platforms and hyper-converged. And you know about what EvoRail is, I'm sure, and the Evo SDDC concept that we talked about today. But there's also this concept of platform as a service. You understand what converged infrastructure is doing from the OS layer down and automating all that systems integration work? Well, what Cloud Foundry does is the same kind of concept of converged technology, but from the OS layer up. So that all the developers have to worry about is their code, and they just deploy it on a platform. to run the application on infrastructure as a service, underlying infrastructure that would support that application workload. So when you think about things like technical debt, if you think about what IT operations does and these IT organizations today do as being a cost center, how much time is spent just keeping the lights on and ensuring that these applications are running and ensuring that they're running healthy and they're optimized? Well, you're never going to be able to escape your technical debt if you're spending all your time and work on that. So you want to be able to flip that. So you're doing 80% of your work automating these tasks and pushing the needle forward and moving the ball down the court, so to speak, versus keeping the lights on. And so, Pivotal Cloud Foundry has their own distribution of it. Cloud Foundry itself is an open foundation in which all the big competitors are contributing to. Cisco, IBM, Dell, EMC, everybody's coming together and saying we need to standardize on how these applications are going to run in the cloud and standardize on this platform so that these businesses and our customers will have a standardized platform in which they can deploy their apps on. And so Pivotal Cloud Foundry has their own distribution of that. Think of it like Red Hat, what Red Hat does for Linux, the open operating system. Pivotal Cloud Foundry is the same thing. They have their own distribution of it in which you get a little bit extra convenience by running very simple commands that do a lot of tasks all at once. But now you take this concept as running infrastructure as code. I'm pretty sure a lot of you have probably heard of Puppet and Chef and Ansible. HashiCorp is doing a lot of stuff with Terraform and Vagrant. But think about infrastructure as code as another abstraction layer on top of your software-defined data center in which now you can introduce version control and marry that stable, reliable infrastructure environment to the application code that is running and also managed through version control. So that is how you can achieve very optimized environments. And so when we're talking about these next generation applications, we're also really talking about what Gartner has defined as bimodal IT. There's still going to be requirements in which, in mode 1, or that traditional IT model, in which you need to emphasize safety and accuracy and maintain the care and feeding of these applications. But mode 2 is emphasizing on agility and speed. And so when you think about that, in platform 2, we're talking about it being very hardware resilient and having a client-server relationship, geolocated, virtualized, versus platform 3 it emphasizes on application resiliency, making sure that your application is going to be resilient. If you ever heard of like what Chaos Monkey is, it's because Netflix runs in AWS, and Netflix realized that they needed their application to be very resilient. And so they created this thing called Chaos Monkey, in which it will randomly shut things down so that they can prevent failure before it occurs, or identify when their system gets sick so that they can eliminate downtime. And so Platform 3 emphasizes mobile devices geo-distributed versus geolocated, and containerization. We're talking about containers and microservices previously. This is that environment. I don't know if any of you have heard this term called pets versus cattle, but that's what we're talking about here. In mode 1, it's care and feeding of your pets. We're in mode 2, you treat that infrastructure and those applications like cattle. You know, if one goes sick, you just kill it, get it out of the way, and redeploy a new one that's healthy in its place. And some has also referred to it as pets versus chickens. So, anyways, that gets us to what DevOps is trying to ultimately achieve. DevOps is a philosophy, it's a culture, it's an organizational practice in which supports everything that I just recently talked about creating an environment in which you want to automate as many things as possible. You want to be able to collaborate with your peers. During the keynote with Brian Huddleston, he was talking about collaboration and talking about these silos, having network teams, you know, interface with the storage teams and the virtualization teams and the app teams. It's also a culture in which it supports and fosters empathy. If you think about that, like, as your IT operations is saying, as software teams are throwing their software over the wall, over to the IT operations to say, okay, here's my code, here's my app, now run it. and they don't care about anything else. Now the IT operations team is, there's a lot of finger pointing going on. So it creates an environment in which you want to collaborate, and then now the coders will be like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to create like that much more work for you. But on the flip side, I can write a script real quick that will automate those 10 tasks down a single click or push of a button. So it's an environment in which fosters that collaboration. It's also an environment in which when you're working in you have these workflow streams going on in delivering your applications on these infrastructure environments. You want to eliminate as much waste as possible. And one example of that could be potentially somebody that is the jack of all trades that the whole business is going to just to get something done. The IT generalist. But yet he maintains all that knowledge in his head. And that may be good for him and his job security, so he thinks or she thinks, but it's not good for business. You want that person to share their knowledge and that knowledge transfer. And what you want is, as these businesses are trying to find that competitive advantage, you want the ability for everybody to deliver on that, to have that one shared common goal in mind to deliver on. So there's this book called The Phoenix Project. If you haven't heard of it, I would recommend you read it because it's a fictional novel that describes this story that I just pictured for you. Now, what DevOps also is, by the way, it's a new buzzword, and a lot of companies that are practicing DevOps may not refer to it as DevOps. Some refer to it as rapid release, continuous integration, continuous delivery, whatever it is. Again, it's this culture and this mindset in which you want to tear down these silos, and it's a convergence of IT operations coming together with software development, but also quality assurance. Quality assurance is interfacing with the business and ensuring that you're going to put out a high-quality product. And so, the Amazon CTO Werner Vogels actually says this famous quote was, the traditional model is that you take your software to the wall that separates development and operations and throw it over, and you forget about it. But not at Amazon. This brings the developers in a day-to-day operation with their software. It also brings them in day-to-day contact with the customer. And that customer feedback loop is essential. And you can think of your customers, not your outward-facing customers, but also your internal customers. Think about an insurance company. The insurance adjuster has to do a claim. They're also the customer of that insurance company. And you want to be able to automate as much and make that software that agent uses very simple to use. So that there's not frustration out in the field. Now, I also work I have a lot of customers that I work with that are practicing DevOps as well. And one of them also is a real estate mortgage broker. And their competitive advantage isn't trying to augment a revenue stream or maintain their market share. Their competitive advantage is to write software, because they're in a highly regulated industry, to write software that keeps them compliant. More compliant than their competitors, and that's a competitive advantage. So think about this as you're thinking about your businesses that you work for, and those competitive advantages that you need to realize and understand. I also interface with some customers too, and I ask them, who's your competition? They have no problem rattling off who their competition is, but I kind of chuckle and I'm like, you may not know today who your competition is, because you may be disrupted by somebody that you saw coming from nowhere. Like take Uber, for example. So, anyways, this DevOps practice is modeled after a lot of agile methodologies. Agile software development has been around for a long time, and now IT operations can learn from that and how to be more agile. If you want to know more about it, there's a lot of publications around the 12 principles of agile, but it follows systems thinking, understanding that the system that you support is built through a lot of individual parts and pieces that they all need to work together. And it also follows lean thinking. And what that is modeled after is this the Toyota production system that was created in lean manufacturing, identifying all the workflow constraints and being more lean in your production systems. You can think of that from an IT operations standpoint. We're very similar in what we do from an IT standpoint to a manufacturing line. And so this whole concept is based upon these feedback loops, these short feedback loops, which we call validated learning. So from the conception of an idea, you want to be able to deliver that idea very quickly. You want to build and write your code around it, then put it in motion. Send it out to the business. Then you want to measure it, monitor it, collect metrics on it, learn from it, and collect data from it, and then this feedback loop continues to go on to the next idea, to the next idea. Now this feedback loop you can think about like from the business interfacing with their customers, learning from your customers. And then that business feedback loop goes back to the DevOps organization to deliver on. So there's a great book that I read called The Lean Startup that talks about this, and this is the whole premise of the book, based upon the Toyota production system. But what's interesting about this book is it talks about a lot of companies, like how Dropbox became Dropbox, how Groupon became Groupon, how Intuit with Owens TurboTax did some things by adopting these concepts and creating these little innovation pockets within their business so that they can find these competitive advantages to deliver on. And so there's a continuation of this book that is tailored towards big enterprises such as Target that wants to adopt some of these practices into their businesses. Because when you think about a large enterprise, there's a lot of politics, bureaucracy, processes, procedures that can get in the way of these innovation cycles. So you want to tear down those walls. And so there's this concept, once you're able to learn from those feedback loops, called an MVP. And this is how software is developed. It's a minimum viable product. And so say in this example, if your idea was to create a vehicle for human transportation, you don't start with a car first necessarily. Because if you look at it all along the way as you're building this car, you don't have a working product in your hands in which you can give to your customers, in which you can collect revenue on, in which you can put that feedback loop in place, can continue to learn and evolve. So maybe the other alternative route to take is, all right, fine, let's start very simple with this minimum viable product, and let's just take a board and put a set of wheels on it and give it to the guy to ride. Right? And then, as you're learning from the customer, they may say, oh, but if you put a handle on this thing, you might be able to get more people to ride this that don't have as good balance as I do or whatever. And then it evolves to, oh, but then if you put a gear system on this, maybe easier to ride, you can sit on this thing now. And then eventually it'll evolve to getting to a car. But all along the way, your customer is happy. And all along the way, you're collecting revenue, so the business is happy. So that's how these applications are being developed today. These cloud-native, next-gen applications. Uber did not become Uber by creating a software app in which, oh, let's just give it to anybody with a car to give anybody a ride somewhere. They actually started by coming up with this idea and then going after those professional drivers who we know as Uber Black, the guys that are sitting in the airport with the last name of you as you arrive. They gave them a software as a service application to give them more business. And then once they evolved that application to the point to where now they say, okay, we trust this software to the point to now we can give it to anybody with a car to give anybody a ride somewhere. So that is how the business landscape is taking place today, and those are some good examples in which you should be aware of. And think about this, because you really want, software is very important in our day-to-day lives now, and providing this level of convenience to the businesses that you work for. You want to be able to interface with those development teams, because you're supporting them, and you're getting your paychecks from the companies that you work for that are building these products or supporting these products or whatever it is. So anyways, it's an important concept to understand. And so Puppet Labs surveys a lot of customers that are participating in DevOps and comes up with this State of DevOps reports, in which they're able to determine now that these high-performing IT organizations can deploy more frequently, have shorter lead times for delivering their software because they're doing it in a very time-boxed, short release cycle, and they're releasing very minimum code because they don't want to release a big animal of software updates in which there's all these moving components in it and it'd be hard to back out of, so they do it very short and quickly. So you're able to have fewer failures, you're able to recover faster. And so there's a lot of competitive advantages that can be gained from this. I like to think, because I'm a golfer, I like to think of DevOps like golf. You're never going to perfect it, but you can continuously improve. And I mean, when you go to play golf and you expect to get a hole-in-one on every hole, that's impossible. But that would be a perfect golf game, you would think, right? So you need to monitor, measure, collect metrics on what you're doing so that you can always continuously improve. And think about that when you're reflecting on your career. You want to be able to continuously improve your career. So with that being said, in closing,
in the individual work contributions that you make in your job, look to identify ways in which you can become more efficient in your individual contributions. And when you do that, you may be able to find ways to automate some of your work processes that are repeatable. And then with that, you're able to increase your quality of work that you contribute. You're able to increase the speed in which you're delivering your work. And then you're able to reduce your cost because now you're more valuable. Now, furthermore, if you start there, now, for the companies that you work for, you can think about ways in which you may be able to identify
some of these efficiencies within the business. And now you may want to evangelize some of your ideas that you identified in regards to becoming more efficient and share that with your company. You know, there's no harm, no foul in that. At the end of the day, as we're talking about, you know, the eliminating the systems integration work, that can be bought today. In order for you to be relevant, you need to understand what the technology is doing to be able to translate that to what the business is trying to achieve. So if you ask yourself, how do I want to be relevant? This is how you can show your value. This is how you can be relevant to your company. In all of my previous jobs and all my annual reviews, I always said two things. I want to know that what I'm doing is providing an impact and I'm providing value. And when I leave this, I want to feel good about this when I move on to the next opportunity and know that I'm leaving a legacy behind, that I can be proud of. And so, with that being said, complacency is a bad place to live in. And so, when you find yourself becoming complacent or too comfortable, you want to disrupt yourself. Disrupt yourself, be more curious, learn, embrace this new technology, identify ways in which you can leverage it so that you can be more relevant to your business and provide that value. And so, when I joined EMC, this is what they said to me. I need to be able to build my brand. So I'm doing that. They know that they need to push me outside of my comfort zone. And I have been pushed outside of my comfort zone. And when you are and you challenge yourself like that, that's where the magic happens. So, as you progress in your field and in IT, it's a constantly evolving and changing industry. It's an exciting industry to be working in. We're living in exciting times. You should feel excited about what you're going to do. So, free beer.